What's happening, Hardscapers? This is episode 162 of the How to Hardscape podcast, where we talk about how you can start and grow your hardscaping business. And today is our first in our Thursday episodes. I am adding a second episode per week, if I can keep up with this, to talk about any of your questions that come in, anything that you want aired out in the industry, and to also pick apart our Monday's episode. What I'm going to be doing is playing some sound bites from that episode and talking about it a little bit further, my thoughts, my opinions on things that our previous guests say, because I don't want to do that in the actual interview. I want to continue to bring things out of the guests that we have on the show and not take up the time with that guest, that time that a guest has given us to talk about my own opinions on things. So in this episode, in these Thursday episodes, that's essentially what we are going to be doing. I've got a few sound bites that we are going to be getting into, followed up by a few audience questions that I've gotten on our Instagram page. Now, if you want to have something talked about on this show, if you have a question or you have something that you want to talk about, you can message me at How to Hardscape, or if I post a story with a question box, throw it in there, or go to speakpipe.com/howtohardscape. There you can leave a voicemail message that will be played on this podcast. So if you have something that you want to say, something that you want to have aired out on this podcast, that is your best chance to do that here. Or if you have questions in general about anything that I've talked about in previous episodes, anything that the guests have said that you agree with, disagree with, now is your chance to do that with speakpipe.com/howtohardscape. And if you don't necessarily have something that you want answered or want to say, I do have a prompt on every Thursday episode that I want you to answer, and send in your voicemail messages or send in your responses to How to Hardscape on Instagram. And today I want you to answer what you think this impending recession is going to look like for our industry. This is more of an opinion piece. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, but how do you think that this may affect our industry in the coming months and year or so, depending on how long it'll last? And what are you doing in your business to plan for, prepare for, and have in place a plan if anything was to happen in our industry to move demand down in our market? Let me know at speakpipe.com/howtohardscape. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. So in the previous episode, we had Landon from Planet Green Landscapes on the show, and he talked about a lot of different things from his journey and his story. One of the things that he talked about that came up was actually starting his business in 2007, 2008, when the recession had hit, and his advantages of having started his business during this time, and how he was able to capitalize on doing so in having low overhead and just being able to be a lean company and willing to grind to get that work. But let's hear what Landon actually had to say on this.
And that was 2009. 2008, 2009, right when that sort of recession happened. And that was I think it was a blessing for us to start at that time, because we had no expectations. Our costs were relatively low, all things considered. And we just did whatever. We'd pick up and relay 3 patio slabs. We would do a little walkway and just tried to do the right thing, make people happy, and off we went. I think it was a huge advantage. It was, I think that's what probably got some people to take a chance on us. If a big reputable company in the area is going to charge you $100,000 for this backyard you wanted to do, and I come in there not knowing my numbers and we price it at $60,000, you're like, wow, he'd have to really mess this up for it not to be worth saving 40 grand. So I think maybe there was some of that, like where people were looking for places to cut. And maybe that means they were going with a B or C grade company, which I think we would definitely fall into at that time. It also set our expectations really low as far as, right now, if you were to start a company last year, I can't even refer work to other companies when I'm too busy because they're all too busy. So you don't have that same, I don't want to say hunger or drive, but you don't have that same reality of like how hard you had to work to have projects to do. And that was our baseline. So yeah, like I said, it made us willing to take on anything. It made me personally very, like, I was always worried about debt. We've always, financing, all that stuff always kind of freaked me out because you remember those times when there wasn't a lot to do or there wasn't a lot of money to float things. So I think it structured us financially very well, where we played it very safe with, owning the stuff that we have and not extending ourselves. So yeah, I would say all in all, that was, I think it was a perfect time for us to just get going.
Here's what I took away from this and what Landon was saying about starting during that time in a recession and having low operating costs, and especially with what he said at the end there, and being sort of debt adverse and not willing to take on a lot of debt. And that really helped them during that time and navigating through that time in their business, because with low demand and perhaps sales not being where they needed to be, at the very least, they're not having bills that they're needing to make each and every month that are stacking up higher and higher. And they're being able to be a lean business during that time in business. Going off of what he also said was that just made him so much more hungrier and really willing to put in the work to get the work. And it was a much more difficult time to get that work. So that really set them up when things got a little bit easier and demand slowly started to come back after that recession. And it really set them up for success that way, because when you start at a more difficult time in business, that just sets you up for success later in business when things may be a little bit easier, because you've learned the things that you need to be able to do to get to the next step at a much more difficult pace, rather than starting during these last couple of years when things have been so great and not really knowing how difficult it is to get work if something were to happen in the market. If demand did start to drop in the market, you've only known good times to be able to pick up work and don't really understand how difficult it can be at times to get work in, say, a recession or in a time period where demand is lower than it has been in these past 2 years. Like Landon said, he can't even find companies to be able to subcontract to good, reputable companies because everybody's so booked out. So if you're starting a business in these past 2 years, you've likely just been booked out just because you are a company that's willing to do work. But that's not always going to be the case, and we will experience a recession, even if right now we aren't going through one or whatever is going to lead to the next one. It's not if a recession will happen, it is when a recession will happen. So you just need to understand that these market trends, they do go up and down, and you need to prepare for the times that they do go down. And being debt free is one way to be able to navigate through these different times in the market, as well as just being able to do whatever it takes and take on whatever it takes to get through these difficult times. This topic was just such a great topic to get into with Landon, as well as with future guests that we'll be having on the show. This is going to be a recurring theme I think you'll see with our guests coming on, and especially guests that have been through a recession. I definitely make sure that I'm going to be asking everybody about this because it is a topical conversation to have, but it's also something that will play out multiple times in your career, and it's not going to be something that is just for today. It's definitely going to be something that will help you in business throughout the majority of your career. Now, I myself have never navigated through a recession. I entered the job market out of high school and working for a landscape supplier during 2007, 2008. That's when I started, but I was still actually just going into university. So it's not like I felt that pinch during that time. and especially as a business owner. So I don't have that experience, but I know with how I've set my business up right now that I would have no problem being able to navigate through a recession if we have one, and really no matter the length, because I've kept my business very lean, intentionally and unintentionally. There's things that I wish I was a step further in, but there's things that I've really planned for a time in the market to take a downturn, because we've had such a bull run for so long that even when I started my business, we were due for a market correction. And that's why I tried to keep myself lean enough that when that market correction does come, I'm ready for it. Now, that does leave opportunity on the table in order to set your business up for that. And I missed out probably on a lot of profit during these past 2 years, but I've been able to do my business the way I want to do my business, both professionally and personally, where I find myself in my life. So it's just worked out for me, and it fits my lifestyle for now. It's not where I'm going to be forever, and I'm looking forward to beginning and continuing to scale my business and having an opportunity to do so and to capitalize on certain things. If the market does take a downturn, or if it continues to grow from here, I'm ready for either way in my business. On to our next topic with Landon. He mentioned something here really quickly that I just loved, and it has to do with a little bit of marketing, a little bit of branding for your business, but it's best if I just let Landon take it away here.
You know, we'd come, and back then it wasn't like iPads and stuff. I literally had printed photos of our, you know, the 6 most impressive things we had done. And sort of built off that. And then that's kind of where the marketing part of it came in. Never big on like advertising, but as far as like when people found us, or if we got someone's attention and they looked for us, we wanted to be very intentional about what they learned about us.
I loved what he said there, being intentional about what the client learns about your business, what the client sees with your business, because that is the image that you are projecting on the public, on potential clients. So really, and with Landon's story and with so many others' story, you take on the work, any work that you possibly can in the beginning of your business if you're just starting out, and if you don't necessarily have the equipment to do things, or you're just starting your business. You're taking on anything and everything to make ends meet, to get to the next level in your business. And eventually you get to a point where you don't want to continue to do that type of work, or maybe you want to scale that type of work. But if you're moving on to the next phase in your business and you want to be getting out of things like lift and relays, it's not something that you want to be posting on social media. It's not something that you want to be putting out there for potential clients to see, because that's not the type of work that you want to be known for. So if you're still doing lift and relays, and I'm talking to also myself here, if you're still doing lift and relays, but you want to get into design build, it's okay to be doing lift and relays and filling in those pockets in your schedule. But if you don't want to be doing lift and relays later in your business, if you want to be transitioning towards a more design build business, it doesn't make sense for you to be advertising those projects that you're doing, those lift and relays. It doesn't make sense to be posting those photos on social media, because that's not the work that you're trying to get. You're trying to get those beautiful outdoor living spaces, if that's the direction that you want to be moving towards. Or maybe it's just the middle of the line paver with features involved with that, whether that be seating walls, outdoor lighting, gas fire features, all of that mixed in with it. You want to be posting the work that you want to be getting, and not just posting for the sake of it. You need to be really intentional and thinking about everything that you put out there, because it shows what kind of business you are. And I was talking to someone else about this same thing, that there's so many niches for you to create a business in this industry. And there's so many things that you can specialize in to be able to fulfill, because there's so many things that are enveloped in this industry, everything from lift and relays to those beautiful $100,000 plus outdoor living spaces and pool spaces that you can get into, and everything in between with that. And then we transition over to talking about Landon purchasing the business from his previous employer. And after starting a business with his partner and calling it Twilight Landscapes and not wanting to be identifying with the movie or the series of the same name, they purchased Planet Green Landscapes. And I asked him if that was a decision he would repeat going back to it, and this is his response to that.
I think I would. So our name, Planet Green, it's like PLANIT Green. I hated the name so much. Like when we first, that was like my biggest hesitation to buying the company. I just thought it was kind of cheesy, and there were so many landscape companies around here that had green in their name somewhere. Now it did save me from being confused with the Vampire Twilight series, so maybe that's a good thing. But as far as buying the company goes, I mean, it doesn't, I don't know if that really impacted anything one way or the other, to be honest with you. I think, like I said, we got a truck, a trailer, hand tools, and then we took over the name.
I like Landon's response in not really liking the name at first and really not purchasing necessarily a business, but more so the equipment that came with the business. They weren't purchasing much. When it came to Planet Green Landscapes, the name didn't really have much recognition in the area as it was. So when it comes to deciding to purchase a landscaping business, you really need to decide what exactly are you purchasing. Are there systems in place, processes in place that really take you out of it? I spoke with somebody close to me about purchasing a contracting business, and I was pretty adamant about them not purchasing a business like that because it just didn't have anything in place besides the equipment, and maybe the employees, if they stayed along with that, but the way that this transition would have worked would make me think that the employees would not have actually stayed on. So really, what are you purchasing there? Just the equipment and the name, if there is any good name to go along with it, and plus the warranty work that business, that name has actually have to stand behind. So a little bit of liability that comes with that purchasing that business as well. So all of that needs to be factored into your purchase of a contracting business. And it seems like Landon really addressed that there in really understanding that Planet Green didn't at the time have the name recognition. So perhaps they're not paying for that. Perhaps they're just paying for the equipment that came with that. And that really set them up to be able to take on those initial projects and to move forward as a business and to establish a name for themselves. Perhaps it was a good thing that that name wasn't established prior to them coming in, because they could then direct that business to exactly the way that they wanted it to be, as opposed to doing a complete rebrand or really changing up their marketing plan and deciding to get into that design build space rather than what they were exactly doing before with that business. And since we're on the topic about names, I think a name is really important, but if it's holding you back from actually starting a business, it's probably not as important as something like that. But you still, I would veer away from naming it with your name in the name of the business, just in case you do say pass it along to the next person or try to sell it, whatever that transition may look like, whatever your exit strategy is for your business. Going with a area that you are servicing could be good for search engines and search engine optimization with that. But if you do decide to move to a different area, if that could possibly be in your cards, maybe it's not the best idea to go that route as well. I've seen a lot of successful and incredible rebrands in this space, at least from the people that I follow online and people that I've had on the podcast, like Jordan and Kyle from Evolve Design Build. They transferred from Curitech Lawn Care to Evolve Design Build. Also, Aaron's Outdoor Spaces, he went from that to Spaces Design Build, and complete logo and rebranding that goes along with that to really show the evolution, the name that they want to create for themselves and the brand image that they want to create for themselves. So an interesting topic that came up there with naming a business and with what Landon brought up there. And then we get into hiring, and Landon, take it away here.
I like to hire the person and train for the skill. Like to try to go out and poach a foreman off another company or something and just expect them to plug into your company and see the benefits of that. That's not something I'm really interested in. And it's not something I think works real well. All of our best employees are people that, started here, had great personality, work ethic, and then given the opportunity, they just developed. And I also find that you want to find people that don't think the same as you, right? Like if everyone thought like me, we'd be in big trouble at Planet Green, but they have the same values, the same goals and whatever. If they're people that, love the client interactions, love doing really good work, and are diligent, hardworking, pleasant people to be around, it's not going to take them long to be a great fit and learn a lot. And then you're able to provide opportunities for them as well and be happy for them, seeing them do well.
Hiring is something that I am not good at, something that I want to improve on, employee retention, all of that, to be able to create an environment that really has people wanting to come to work, show up for work, and be happy to be there. So I'm doing actually a lot of reading on this subject. I'm doing a lot of just especially having guests on the show to be able to ask them about this, and hearing responses like Landon's is something that is very, I'd say, consistent with those companies that have been able to retain their employees, keep employees, and really build their employees up. That whole idea of not hiring for the skills, but hiring for the person. And just because skills can be trained, skills can be taught, but personality and their who they are as a person, that's just who they are. That's going to be a very difficult thing to change, and it's something that you probably don't want to be tackling yourself. But if you can get the right person, you can train that person. And that is something that I'm looking for in my business personally, something that I've struggled with for years now. And even when I feel like I've got the right one or two people in place, it just eventually doesn't necessarily work out. And it's not that, they didn't like the work environment. They just were set up for other things. And I completely support them in their decisions to do so, and will help them in any way I possibly can, in any area that they go to. And just hearing what Landon has to say about hiring and about building people up and ensuring that they are in the right space and that they're in the right fit for that business, and being able to get them to accomplish their own goals, to identify their goals and to work towards that together, is such an important thing here, and an important takeaway from the things that I've read about and guests that I've had on the show to talk about. And another thing that Landon says is to hire people that think differently than you, especially in those key critical roles where, and I've noticed this, where I've got somebody and they think a little bit differently. They don't even know the industry, and they're asking, well, why do we do this? Why don't we do it this way? What if we were to do it this way? Like, that's the employee that I love. And obviously that's what sets you up for success, because you don't want more people like yourself. You want people that can fill in holes in your business, that things that you don't excel at, you can have somebody in place to be able to excel in that position. And that's where that whole team mentality really comes to play, especially with building a business and a successful business in and of itself that can really operate and can really play to one another's strengths, because you're definitely not good at everything. You're not 100% at everything. Everybody has their specialties. Everybody has their strengths. Everybody has their weaknesses. And if we're all playing to each other's strengths, that's when things really start to grow. So I loved Landon's thought process on that. And there's so much more that he said on that on the podcast. So you should definitely go back, listen to Landon's podcast episode, especially if you want to hear more about him talking about operating through a recession when he was just starting his own business, or the name of his business and how he went about purchasing the business, and marketing, branding, everything that we talked about here. We've covered just the surface of this and just points that really stuck out to me, but there's so much more to go at in that previous episode, so go check out that episode. And once again, if you have anything that you agree with, disagree with, or want to add on to about what I said, about what Landon said, message at How to Hardscape on Instagram or speakpipe.com/howtohardscape. Record a voicemail. I'll play it on the next episode and discuss that further. But for now, let's get into a few audience questions that has come up from previous stories that I have posted. Now, if you want one of yours read on a future episode, if you have a question for me, if you have a question in general about the industry, frustrations that you have in an industry, anything that you want to air out, this is a good opportunity to be able to do that. But in this specific instance, I did post a story that asked for frustrations that you're feeling now in the industry. Now, I do want to say that if you do follow us on Instagram, I want you to go to our profile and I want you to click the notification bell by our name and highlight everything that comes there, especially the stories, because that's when you're going to know that we've posted a story and you can interact with it there. It's been more and more difficult to get the reach on Instagram to be able to, for everybody to see our stories and to see when we are posting these SpeakPipe links or asking these questions for these shows. But that's the best way to be able to get that. How to Hardscape. Go to our page and click that notification bell and make sure you've got everything highlighted there so that you get notifications to your phone when we post something for you to interact with there. And without further ado, we've got a couple frustrations that we want to get into, and we'll be getting into future topics covered on the show here. And the next week, we are going to be talking and taking your insights on a recession, how you're going to operate through that. So speakpipe.com/howtohardscape or at howtohardscape on Instagram. And for this specific question, we had Dig Deep Landscaping. Product availability is a frustration. And yes, that is a frustration that we have most likely all been feeling. And time again, we get told to plan in advance, get our orders in. But there's obviously things that are out of our hands at times. And this is where things really get frustrating, especially in these past couple of years. But I'm sure we're going to get through it. We're going to get past these product shortages, these product availabilities. I'm sure the manufacturers are doing everything that they can to keep up with what they are churning out. But otherwise, they're just leaving money on the table during this time. But it is a frustrating thing to have to go through, especially if product shows up and it might have some quality issues and it's got to go back and then you're waiting on product to come to replace it, or just things in general that maybe the client decides that they want to add on to something, or maybe your measurements were slightly off and you're just missing a few pieces. Those are when those frustrations really pile up for you yourself, because we as contractors take on everything in terms of the client complaining to us and then having to deal with that and then having to mitigate everything that's going on around this. And it's just not a great situation to be in, but we will get through this and we will get past this. And there will be a time that product shortages and product availability will be a thing of the past, I am sure. But that is a great frustration to bring up there. Dig Deep Landscaping. And then we got Mark C. Pelton, who says how to deal with clients that are measuring, using levels and squares to check things. And that is a great question. And honestly, I've had one situation where this was happening. I work in a subdivision quite a bit where it is retired folks, but they're all really great people. And they sometimes sit out there or stand out there, ask me questions, but they really mean it in the best way possible, a very great spirited way. And I actually love talking about what I'm doing. And I love talking about our industry to clients and educating them on exactly what I'm doing step by step. So that part of it, I really like. It's the part when somebody starts picking apart what you're doing. And that's something that's difficult. And that happened in my first year in business. And ultimately, it's not a great situation to be in because you've already sold the job. They've already signed up and you're there and you're working. It's not like that's going to go away. That's just their personality. That's just what they are going to do. The best way to handle it is just to get that job done as soon as possible with the best quality possible and move on with what you are doing. And take a note on that client and think about when you first met them during that initial consultation and with future consultations with them and leading up to that job. Were there any red flags that came up that told you that they would be really particular and be really tedious in what you were doing? I had a client that it passed on immediately, and she told me straight up that nobody would take her on as a client. And this was at that first consultation. And this is when I didn't even do pre-qualifying. So I was going anywhere and everywhere to meet clients. So I met her and she told me that straight up, nobody would take her on as a client because she told them that she was very, very picky. She wanted everything exactly symmetrical. And she would be out there measuring to a T and to the centimeter that she would want it symmetrical because that's just how her brain works and that's just how she wants things to be. Because if she said that she couldn't live with anything else otherwise, it would break her. It would really, she wouldn't be able to live with it. So it was really great that she was very open and honest about that. But I told her that it probably wouldn't be a great fit for us either. And I did kind of give her some insights while I was there, but you know what? If she didn't come out and told me that exactly, I would have been asking questions on the job site on that initial consultation to try to see how she would react to certain things and see what kind of things came up in order for me to say, okay, this is going to be a tedious, picky client. Perhaps it's not something that I want to take on, but I do know that things are sometimes out of our control in terms of, especially when we're starting out our business and the jobs that we take on and maybe needing to take on anything and everything that comes our way to be able to build our portfolio and get going. But in terms of already being on the job site and being able to take on that type of client, you just have to, at this point, you really just have to deal with it and treat it as professionally as possible and try to explain to that client each step that you're taking to be able to do as high of a quality project as you possibly could for them. Take it as a learning experience. You get off that job site as soon as possible and do as good as a job as you possibly can. And you will be looking for those red flags on future consultations. I can 100% guarantee you, as long as you go back and think back to those initial consultations with that client and what were those red flags, or what questions can you ask future clients to be able to see whether or not they like something a specific way and if they are going to be a tedious client. But that's all I got for In Me today for this episode. I've got many other questions that came in that we'll be getting into in future episodes. But those are the two main frustrations that I definitely saw come through on our questions there that were posted to our story. So if you have other frustrations that you want us to talk about here on the podcast, again, speakpipe.com/howtohardscape. Leave a voicemail there. It'll be played on the podcast, or message me at howtohardscape on Instagram. And for next week's episode, if you want something to talk about, we're going to be taking voicemails on the coming recession. What are your plans? How are you going to manage through it? What do you think the demand in the market is going to be like? Anything that you want to talk about there, speakpipe.com/howtohardscape or at howtohardscape on Instagram. Leave us a message there, and we'll be definitely sure to play it on next week's podcast. And I just want to say thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. If you haven't, leave us a rating and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you can find podcasts. And thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. We'll catch you next week.